9:13 in the morning, Caribbean Sea. The sun had already climbed high above the horizon, pouring sharp, clean light over the calm blue water as a U.S. aircraft carrier held a steady course through international waters. Visibility reached beyond 15 nautical miles. The sea state was low. The weather was almost perfect. It was the kind of quiet, ordinary morning sailors train through countless times, but rarely remember. A routine daylight transit, a U.S. Navy carrier strike group moving lawfully, calmly, and with clear intent. No drills were scheduled, no alerts were active. Flight operations were paused, aircraft were secured on deck, and crews were carrying out standard checks. From the bridge, the horizon looked peaceful. From the sensors, the picture was far more detailed. A carrier never moves alone. Destroyers and cruisers formed a layered protective screen stretching miles outward. Every ship was linked into the same tactical network. Air and surface radar scanned without pause. Electronic systems listened for signals. Underwater sensors watched the space below. Every feed came together inside the Combat Information Center, the CIC, where watch teams tracked, sorted, and recorded everything that moved. By 9:16 in the morning, the display showed ordinary surface traffic. Merchant vessels following predictable routes, regional patrol craft keeping their distance. Fishing boats moving slowly along the edges of known lanes. Nothing appeared unusual. Then, near the outer edge of the radar picture, a small group of contacts appeared. 6 surface vessels, loosely arranged and moving at a moderate speed. At first, there was nothing about them that demanded attention. By 9:18, the watch team began refining the tracks, hull size, wake length, signal profile. The vessels were identified as Venezuelan naval ships. Still routine, still lawful, still distant. Then, at 9:20, the picture changed. One vessel accelerated first, moving past 12 knots. A few seconds later, another followed. Then the rest. Within moments, all 6 had increased speed together. Their headings shifted, no longer matching the normal flow of traffic. At sea, geometry matters. And now the geometry was changing. The CIC alerted the bridge. Range and bearing were updated. Closest point of approach narrowed. Projected timelines shortened. In clear daylight, with open visibility and calm water, there was little room for confusion. 6 naval vessels were maneuvering in coordination. At 9:22, standard bridge-to-bridge radio calls were sent. Clear, professional, and fully in line with international maritime procedures. The message was simple. Identify your intentions and maintain safe separation. There was no answer. A second call followed in English and Spanish, then a third, still nothing. On the flight deck, operations remained steady. That was deliberate. Daylight encounters can magnify every movement. Every visible reaction can be read as a signal. Every shift on deck can be interpreted as a message. Discipline in that moment meant restraint, confidence, and control without provocation. Inside the CIC, the classification became sharper. Formation spacing suggested deliberate control. Wake patterns confirmed sustained acceleration. Signal analysis showed ordinary navigation radar activity with no advanced engagement indicators. But the coordinated movement itself was impossible to ignore. By 9:25, the 6 Venezuelan ships were closing steadily. Their wakes stretched long and bright across the sunlit water, visible through optics and even to the naked eye. The distance was closing at a steady, measurable pace. Time to closest approach was no longer being counted in hours. It was now a matter of minutes. Still, no warning tone sounded. Standing procedures were reviewed and clearly understood. The carrier strike group was operating within its legal rights. There was no need to change course and no reason to raise the situation beyond what it was. The goal remained simple. Control the space, control the tempo, and control the decision-making. The U.S. Navy does not hurry into a direct incident. It gives intent time to reveal itself. And with every new update, that intent was becoming harder to dismiss. Daylight removed uncertainty. There were no shadows to hide behind, no weather to blame, and no darkness to make movements unclear. 6 naval vessels were moving quickly, together, toward a U.S. aircraft carrier in international waters. Every sailor on board understood the weight of the moment. Not because of what had already happened, but because of what had not happened yet. The next few minutes would matter. 9:26 in the morning, Caribbean Sea. By mid-morning, the situation had moved from routine observation into controlled tension. Inside the Combat Information Center, the 6 Venezuelan naval vessels were no longer distant contacts on the edge of the display. Their speeds had settled above 20 knots, far beyond a relaxed patrol pace, and their headings were now clearly converging. In bright daylight, with calm seas and open visibility, the pattern was difficult to mistake. This was not random movement. It was deliberate. The range rings continued to tighten. At 9:27, the closest point of approach for 2 of the vessels dropped below 5 nautical miles and kept shrinking. Track histories showed coordinated acceleration. No delay, no hesitation, no vessel acting alone. They were moving as a formation. The bridge received updates in real time. Standard procedure continued without interruption. Another bridge-to-bridge radio call was sent. This time, the tone was more direct, but still calm and professional. The message repeated the carrier's lawful status in international waters and requested course clarification to ensure safe separation. Again, there was no reply. On the flight deck, sunlight flashed across parked aircraft and the dark surface of the deck as crews continued their normal work. No aircraft were launched, no visible rush followed, no dramatic signal was given. That calm was intentional. In a daylight encounter, posture can speak louder than any radio call. A steady carrier sends a clear message. Nothing here requires panic. Inside the CIC, watch teams followed every meter of movement. Wake angles were measured. Rate of closure was updated again and again. The surface picture refreshed every few seconds, and each update made the margin for error smaller. At sea, tension rarely appears all at once. It builds through distance, speed, timing, and direction. By 9:30, one Venezuelan vessel adjusted course slightly, turning toward the carrier's projected path instead of continuing on a parallel route. Moments later, another vessel made a similar adjustment from a different bearing. The remaining vessels held their speed, keeping a loose but disciplined arc around the carrier's projected route. It was pressure created not through words, but through geometry. On the bridge, the officer of the deck reviewed the standing procedures once again. No legal threshold had been crossed, no deck-mounted systems were being directed outward, no advanced engagement signals were detected. But silence at close range can create its own kind of instability. The danger was not only the movement itself, it was the possibility of misreading it. At 9:33 in the morning, the CIC reported visual confirmation. Optical teams focused high-resolution cameras on the approaching ships. Under clear daylight, hull markings, deck activity, and sensor arrays were easy to identify. Personnel were visible topside. No outward-directed posture was confirmed, but movement near forward mounts was noted and logged. Everything was being recorded. Another radio call was sent. This one was shorter, clear, direct, and professional. Again, there was no answer. The distance continued to shrink. At 9:35, the nearest Venezuelan vessel moved inside 4 nautical miles. From the carrier's bridge wing, the wake turbulence was now clearly visible. Sunlight traced long white lines across the water, marking the approach path behind them. Still, no course correction followed. Inside the CIC, the tension was controlled, but impossible to ignore. Voices stayed calm. Reports were brief. No one rushed. No one guessed. Every action was measured. The United States Navy does not react on impulse. It responds to evidence. By 9:38, all 6 vessels were inside a tightening area around the carrier group. Their formation had compressed. Their speed remained steady. Their headings stayed fixed. And the continued lack of communication had become part of the picture. This was no longer ordinary shadowing. The bridge and CIC stayed in constant coordination, confirming that the carrier strike group would maintain course and speed. A sudden change could create confusion. Holding steady kept the message clear. In daylight, clarity is power. At around 9:40, the margin for error had narrowed sharply. Every maneuver mattered. Every degree of rudder carried meaning. Every change in speed could be interpreted instantly. One poor decision from either side could turn proximity into something far more difficult to control. Still, the carrier did not flinch. No alarms, no sudden movements, no unnecessary display. 6 Venezuelan naval vessels were moving quickly in daylight toward a United States aircraft carrier. And the next decision, spoken or unspoken, would determine whether this remained a test of discipline or became something much more serious. 9:41 in the morning, Caribbean Sea. This was the moment when daylight removed the last layer of doubt. By this point, the 6 Venezuelan naval vessels had closed to a distance where their movement could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. The geometry was tight, the sea was calm, visibility was perfect. Nothing was hidden, and nothing could be blamed on weather, darkness, or chance. Inside the Combat Information Center, the decision point arrived quietly. There was no raised voice, no dramatic order, just calm coordination. At 9:41, the carrier strike group moved into a heightened awareness posture. This was not escalation. It was control. Systems that had been observing from a routine posture were now focused with purpose. Radar settings were refined. Electro-optical systems narrowed their attention. Every movement by the approaching vessels was captured in layered detail. Visual, electronic, and positional. Still, no outward systems were directed toward the approaching vessels. That difference mattered. In daylight, actions can speak louder than capability. The United States Navy does not rush to prove control. It shows it carefully, step by step. At 9:43 in the morning, an aircraft was cleared to launch. not as a warning, but as a visible presence. The helicopter rose smoothly from the deck, its rotors slicing clean circles through the bright Caribbean air. There was no rush in the launch, no alarm, no dramatic signal, just procedure carried out with precision. From above, the picture became clearer immediately. At altitude, the helicopter's sensors provided a wide, unobstructed view of the Venezuelan formation. Hull numbers were readable. Deck activity was visible. Wake patterns confirmed steady speed and coordinated spacing. In full daylight, there was no doubt about what each ship was doing or where each one was heading. At 9:46, the helicopter entered a stable observation orbit at a safe distance. Cameras recorded continuously. Every second was time-stamped. Every frame was geolocated. This was not theater. This was documentation. Back inside the CIC, the flow of information remained steady and controlled. Visual feeds matched radar tracks. Electronic support systems continued monitoring emissions. There were still no advanced targeting indicators and no guidance-related signals. But the overall picture was clear. 6 naval vessels moving quickly. Distance closing without communication. Pressure applied without open confrontation. At 9:48, a small change appeared. One Venezuelan ship adjusted speed slightly, just enough to be noticed. Another shifted heading by only a few degrees. Small movements, but in daylight, small movements carry meaning. The helicopter crew saw it first. At 9:50, the aircraft adjusted its orbit, keeping clear visibility without moving too close. The message was quiet, but unmistakable. Every movement was seen. Every choice was recorded. There would be no room to deny it later. Still, no warning action was taken. No unsafe maneuver followed. The carrier continued on course. This was the turning point. In gray zone encounters, control is not measured only by distance or capability. It is measured by who sets the pace. And in that moment, the pace had shifted. By 9:52, the Venezuelan formation no longer looked as firm as before. Spacing began to loosen. Speeds varied slightly. The synchronized pressure that had defined the earlier approach started to break down under constant observation. Daylight was unforgiving. Every officer on both sides understood what was happening. Under clear skies, in open water, every decision would leave a record. There were no shadows to hide behind and no uncertainty to use later. At 9:55, the carrier's sensors, aircraft, and escort ships had established full situational control without crossing a single line. The carrier strike group had not changed course. It had not changed speed. It had not directed outward systems. And yet, the dynamic had changed completely. 6 Venezuelan naval vessels were still present. They were still moving, but they were no longer controlling the encounter. In daylight, restraint backed by capability is impossible to miss. The message had been delivered without raised voices, without sudden movement, and without unnecessary risk. It came through control of space, control of time, and control of visibility. What happened next would decide how the encounter ended. 9:56 in the morning, Caribbean Sea. By late morning, the encounter entered its final phase. Not with a dramatic turn, but through small decisions that daylight made impossible to hide. From the air, the helicopter crew noticed it first. One of the Venezuelan naval vessels eased back on its throttles. The change was slight, only a few knots, but it was unmistakable. Its wake shortened. The long white trail behind the hull began to fade. In calm seas and clear light, speed tells the truth before radios do. At 9:58 in the morning, a second ship followed. Its bow shifted a few degrees away from the carrier's projected path. It was not a full withdrawal. Not yet. But it was no longer a direct approach. The remaining vessels held their positions, though the formation was beginning to loosen under constant observation. Inside the Combat Information Center, the update moved calmly through the chain. No raised voices, no sudden orders. The carrier maintained course and speed exactly as it had from the moment the first contact appeared. That consistency mattered. In daylight, stability communicates confidence more clearly than any maneuver. At 10 in the morning, the first radio transmission came through. The voice was controlled, formal, and noticeably different from the silence that had shaped the previous half hour. The message avoided details. It referred to routine patrol activity and proximity to Venezuelan waters. There was no accusation, no demand, but the act of transmitting changed the situation. Communication had returned. The U.S. Navy response was immediate and measured. The carrier identified itself, reaffirmed its lawful presence in international waters, and stated clearly that its movements were being recorded. No warning, no pressure, just clarity. By 10:02, the change in posture was visible across the surface picture. The Venezuelan ships were no longer advancing as a single unit. Their speeds varied, their spacing widened, their headings separated just enough to signal disengagement without openly saying it. From the bridge, sailors could now see more than wakes and hulls. They could see intent fading, and in daylight, there was no hiding it. At 10:05, the helicopter completed one final wide orbit, maintaining observation while slowly increasing distance. Cameras continued recording until separation had moved well beyond any reasonable point of concern. Then the aircraft turned back toward the carrier. Its mission was complete. The carrier never changed course. At 10:07, the closest Venezuelan vessel moved beyond the most critical range. Time to closest approach increased, risk decreased. The geometry that had created tension earlier that morning began to relax. This was not victory through retreat, it was resolution through discipline. By 10:10, the encounter had clearly de-escalated. The Venezuelan naval vessels remained on radar and were still visible beneath the bright Caribbean sun, but their movement no longer suggested coordinated pressure. They had chosen distance over proximity, observation over direct challenge. No sudden action followed, no alarm sounded, no course was changed. In daylight, everything had been seen, logged, and preserved. Every acceleration, every heading change, every silent minute. The record was complete. For the carrier strike group, the mission had never changed. Presence, stability, and control. The U.S. Navy does not need to prove control through dramatic action. Sometimes control is shown through restraint so clear that it cannot be ignored. As the helicopter secured on deck and the CIC returned to routine monitoring, the sea ahead remained calm. The horizon was open. The carrier continued along its planned route exactly as it had before. 6 naval vessels chose to move quickly toward it. Daylight had done its work. The message was unmistakable. Control does not require confrontation, and restraint, when supported by capability, can speak louder than any display of power. 10:10 in the morning, Caribbean Sea. With the encounter resolved, the carrier strike group returned to a steady operational rhythm. But the meaning of what had just happened did not disappear with distance. In broad daylight, 6 naval vessels had moved assertively toward a U.S. aircraft carrier in international waters. And in broad daylight, they had chosen to pull back. That outcome was not accidental. It was the result of doctrine, discipline, and deliberate restraint. Modern naval confrontations rarely start with dramatic action. More often, they begin quietly through geometry, timing, and silence. Analysts often describe this as gray zone pressure, actions meant to create leverage without crossing the legal line into open hostilities. Speeds increase, distance closes, radios fall silent. The objective is not direct confrontation. The objective is influence. In moments like this, the key question is not who moves first. It is who controls the pace. Throughout the encounter, the carrier strike group did exactly that. It held course, it held speed, it held clarity. In daylight, with calm seas and unrestricted visibility, those choices removed uncertainty. There was no confusion about intent, no shadows to misread, no plausible denial to lean on later. Every action by both sides was visible, measurable, and recorded. This is where restraint becomes decisive. The U.S. Navy's rules of engagement are not simply limits. They are instruments of control. They are designed to prevent miscalculation while preserving freedom of action. By refusing to react emotionally, the carrier strike group denied the other side the outcome it may have been seeking. There was no dramatic response to exploit, no overreaction to broadcast, no image of intimidation to shape into a message. Instead, the record showed something very different: lawful presence, professional conduct, and complete situational awareness. Daylight made that message stronger. In poor visibility or darkness, intent can be debated. In full sun, intent becomes harder to explain away. Wake patterns do not lie. Formation spacing does not happen by accident. Speed changes are not random. When the Venezuelan ships adjusted course and reduced speed, the shift was unmistakable, not only to sensors, but to the naked eye. Just as important was what did not happen. No outward systems were directed. No warning action was taken. No sudden course change suggested uncertainty. The carrier strike group demonstrated a principle that has guided U.S. naval operations for generations. Control is not about moving closer to danger. It is about command of the environment. Control the air, control the surface, control the space below, control the record, control the pace. And direct escalation becomes unnecessary. For the sailors involved, this was not theory. It was professional execution. Every watchstander did their job. Every report was logged. Every decision was deliberate. This is what readiness looks like in daylight, under scrutiny, with almost no room for error. Strategically, encounters like this matter far beyond the Caribbean. The same patterns appear in the Western Pacific, the South China Sea, and the Eastern Mediterranean. Different flags, different waters, the same calculation. How far can pressure be applied before restraint turns into resolve? How does a Navy demonstrate strength without taking dramatic action? On this morning, the answer was clear. Restraint backed by capability is not weakness, it is confidence. It tells every observer, partner, and rival the same thing. Escalation is a choice, not an inevitability. And that choice belongs to the side that controls the pace. As the carrier continued along its planned route, the sea ahead remained calm. The Venezuelan ships were still visible on the horizon, but they were no longer shaping the mission. The encounter ended not with confrontation, but with clarity. And that clarity matters. Because the next daylight encounter, whether in the Caribbean or somewhere else, will be measured against this standard. Calm, measured, documented, controlled. So the question remains, and it is worth asking. Should the United States respond more firmly during daylight maritime encounters like this? Or is restraint, when backed by overwhelming capability, still the strongest tool at sea? Share your take in the comments. We read everyone. And if you value clear-eyed analysis of real-world naval encounters, make sure you are subscribed. To support the channel directly, consider joining the fleet. Your support helps bring more professional, fact-based maritime stories to the surface. Out here in full daylight, control speaks louder than force.